Hey guys, tonight we slip through carved cedar doors into a palace that smells like rosewater and quiet betrayal. You walk barefoot down echoing marble corridors, torchlight flickering against blue Iznik tiles, past eunuchs who say nothing and see everything. Somewhere beyond the curtains, a woman is laughing softly, a low velvet sound that once steered the fate of an empire. Her name was Harem. You might know her by another name, Roxolana, but trust me, that's just the tourist. Brochure version. This isn't a love story. It's a cautionary tale wrapped in silk and scented with danger. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's make this a midnight club for people who can't sleep and love a little scandal. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't really walk into a harem. You're absorbed by it, warm ink in water. It's a place stitched together with contradictions, freedom through captivity, influence through invisibility, power without a throne. Tonight, you're drifting through the inner sanctum of Topkapi Palace, the most dangerous no man's land of the Ottoman world. 1,000 rooms, hundreds of women, one sultan. And the unspoken truth, the bedroom has more pull than the battlefield. The air is thick with ambergris and something else, tension perhaps. You pass rows of women trained not just to dance or sing, but to captivate. Girls taken from across the empire, educated in art, music, languages, and most importantly, obedience. You think it's a pretty fairy tale. It's not. It's a factory for power, and sex is the raw material. At the center of this scented trap is one concubine, a red-haired, sharp-eyed girl from what's now Ukraine. Historians still argue whether she was abducted by Crimean Tatars or sold by her own family. Either way, she arrived in chains. But she wouldn't stay bound for long. Her name means joyful in Persian, but her ambition was anything but soft. From the moment she entered the imperial harem, Harem began playing a game no one expected her to win. You sit cross-legged on a plush carpet as she moves. Through her lessons calligraphy by candlelight, the Quran whispered in the dark. Diplomatic etiquette practiced between perfumed fans. This isn't education, it's weaponization. Every smile is studied, every glance rehearsed. You watch as she rises first to the rank of Iqbal, a favorite, then to Haseki, the Sultan's official consort. And then, she breaks the mold entirely, but first sex. Because let's be honest, you didn't come here for just a civics lesson. According to Sex with Kings, royal intimacy wasn't always sensual, it was ceremonial. Ottoman sultans were notorious for limiting access to their sacred anatomy. They'd choose a concubine for the night, who was bathed, perfumed, and coached in the correct levels of deference. She'd enter his chamber, bow 3 times, and wait to be summoned to the bed. But Harem flipped that on its head. She didn't just show up, she seduced. She laughed at him. And instead of being dismissed after one night, she returned again and again. Until the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire's golden boy, found himself tethered not by politics, but by passion. And then he did something unthinkable. He stopped sleeping with the rest. That's when everything changed. Harem was no longer just another pretty face in the harem. She was the sun around which the Ottoman court began to spin. And it spun fast. She bore him sons, multiple, and in a system where sons meant succession, but also murder, it wasn't just maternity. It was maneuvering. You sit quietly now in a shadowed alcove, watching her press folded silk into a eunuch's palm. A bribe? A message? Maybe both. The whispers start early. She's bewitching him, they say. Using potions, spells, one rumor even says she used menstrual blood in his food, an old love magic trick from the villages. Historians still argue whether that one's true, or just misogyny in lace trim. Still, you wonder, how does a girl, once enslaved, now pull the empire's puppet strings? How does she build a web so fine that even the Grand Vizier starts to tread carefully? And here's a tidbit that doesn't show up in most textbooks. Ottoman harems had their own internal police. Women could be accused, interrogated, even executed, all without ever leaving the palace walls. One misstep, one failed alliance, and your head could be politely requested. Yet harem thrived. Not just survived-thrived. By now, you're starting to feel it. That gentle unease. The sense that maybe this story won't end with a palace wedding and a crown. You're right. Because while harem rises, others will fall. Princes will be strangled. Friends will become spies. And the Ottoman Empire, once so unshakable, will start to tremble because of love or lust. Or maybe just a woman who refused to stay where she was put. Welcome to the velvet trap. You've already stepped inside. You wake to the rustle of silk and the quiet gurgle of a courtyard fountain. The morning sun glints off the tiled domes of Topkapi like gold foil. But inside the harem, light moves slowly, filtered through carved wooden screens and drapes dyed deep saffron. You stretch slowly and feel the weight of history pressing down as you follow her again. The girl with fire in her hair and smoke behind her eyes. Harem, still just a favored concubine in title, but already a storm gathering beneath the empire's polished veneer. You watch her today, not in seduction, but in strategy. Her power no longer comes solely from what she offers the Sultan in private. Now it's who she becomes in public. Because the harem is no prison, not when you learn how to bend its bars. Her ascent from captive to Sultan's obsession isn't just improbable, it's almost mythic. Sultan Suleiman wasn't the type to fall. He was known for his restraint, his military genius, his love of poetry and law. He was the magnificent, after all, meant to conquer continents, not be conquered by a concubine. But here he is, writing verses to her, calling her not by her given name, but harem, his joyful one. And that joy? It comes with consequences. Because now the palace is whispering. Again, his mother, Hafsa Sultan, the valid, the true queen of the court, disapproves. Other concubines begin to disappear quietly from his chambers. The Grand Vizier eyes her with cautious reverence, like you might look at a tiger dressed in silk. You can't help but feel the tension coiling in these corridors. Remember, this empire runs on rules, and one of the unspoken ones is that no concubine, no matter how beloved, should ever marry the Sultan. That boundary was sacred, political, but then Suleiman breaks it. Marries her, publicly. Harem becomes his legal wife, the first in over 200 years to hold that title. Historians still argue whether the ceremony was private or state-sanctioned. But the aftershocks were instant. Because a wife isn't just a lover, she's a potential queenmaker. She gains legal standing. She can own property. She can advocate. And harem does. Aggressively. You sit near the fireplace of her private chambers as she pens letters, not to other women, but to European rulers. To Sigismund of Poland. To King Ferdinand of Austria. Her handwriting careful, diplomatic. Her tone, alarmingly polished. One ambassador even writes home that he suspects the Sultan's wife of influencing foreign policy. He's not wrong. And that's not all she's writing. In their private moments, Suleiman composes poems for her. Not war songs or legal decrees, but aching, lovesick verses where he calls her his spring and himself the nightingale, and she writes back. Their letters survive. You read one over her shoulder as she writes about the pain of separation when he's away at war, and how his absence robs her of breath. There's longing, yes, but also subtle manipulation. She reminds him of her loyalty, her sacrifice, her devotion, and with every word, she tightens the thread that binds him to her. Love as leverage, lust as legacy. Meanwhile, she's reshaping the physical world around her. You stroll through the baths she orders renovated, the charitable foundations she starts, the mosque complex she commissions in Istanbul's Fatih district. Yes, women were funding mosques now. Well, she was. And all of this while still producing sons. Not one, not two, 5, each a potential heir. But here's the twist. The Ottoman system didn't allow for dynastic comfort. It thrived on fratricide. Brothers were competition, not companions, so giving birth to sons wasn't a celebration. It was a countdown. You start to sense it now. The tension behind her careful smiles, the stakes of every lullaby. Because every child she births must one day outlive his half-brothers or be buried beside them. Still, she continues. And so do the stories. One fringe tidbit passed among the palace slaves claims she could read omens in the flicker of oil lamps. Another says she learned how to influence dreams, whispering just before sleep to bend Suleiman's mind by morning. These tales may be superstition, maybe not. What's certain is that she's no longer just a woman in the harem. She's become a fixture of the empire, untouchable to some, terrifying to others. You sip warm rose tea and watch as she starts, holding court, quietly, behind latticework screens, advising Suleiman, appearing at public ceremonies. All subtle, all orchestrated. No sudden moves, just ripples in a still pool until the pool tips and the empire starts to reflect her face. More than anyone else's. And yet, for all her control, she's still navigating a minefield. One step out of place and she could lose everything. The Sultan's favor, her children's safety, her own life. That's the genius of it, how she climbs not by brute force, but by seduction, politics, and psychological warfare so refined. It smells like jasmine. You look at her now, seated with a book in hand, a faint smile curling at the edges of her mouth, and you realize something uncomfortable. She doesn't just want love. She wants legacy. And that's the difference between surviving the harem and ruling it. You slip into the hush of twilight, when the palace exhales and the business of seduction resumes. Harem moves through the harem like a candle in the wind-soft glow. Sharp flame. Every gesture is a strategy, every silence a signal. You watch her settle onto embroidered cushions, where secrets are traded over figs and pomegranate juice. And tonight's agenda isn't pillow talk, it's politics. Because once you've seduced the Sultan, the next step is ruling through him. And harem? She's already rewriting the Ottoman manual on power, slowly, silkily, with a smile. The bedroom, once a battleground of bodies, is now the cockpit of the empire. You sit cross-legged nearby as she learns the Sultan's moods, his obsessions, his fears. She doesn't just please him, she manages him. Her fingers trace not only his chest but his insecurities, his guilt, his isolation. Sultan Suleiman, the man who commands a continent, now confides in her more than his viziers. And that intimacy? That's where the real maneuvering begins. She starts nudging, subtly, a whisper here, a question there. Are you sure the Grand Vizier has your best interests? She might ask, head resting on his shoulder, eyes lowered. And slowly, so slowly, he starts to doubt. Not publicly, not yet. But it's in his blood now, the suspicion, the reshuffling. The beginning of the end for anyone who threatens her hold. The term for this isn't just manipulation. It's bedroom politics. And harem perfects it with the finesse of a statesman and the intimacy of a lover. She even earns the nickname, the Sultaness of Intrigue, from foreign diplomats, though they whisper it with both fear and fascination. One ambassador writes that the Sultan consults her in everything, as though she were a minister behind a veil. Historians still argue whether harem truly steered state policy or merely influenced it, whether Suleiman acted on her advice or just loved her too much to say no. But you're here, watching it unfold, and you can tell, it's not that she issues commands. It's that she plants ideas so gently, he thinks they're his own. And it works. It works so well, others begin to notice, and not fondly. Some in the court whisper that harem is possessed. Others believe she uses dark arts. A particularly juicy claim suggests she placed strands of her hair in Suleiman's clothes, enchanted with spells of loyalty. Sounds wild, sure, but this is an empire where sultans wore talismans and court physicians prescribed crushed emerald for heartbreak. So maybe it's not that wild. Meanwhile, behind the curtains of power, a new sexual economy is unfolding. Harem, now the top of the hierarchy, no longer shares her man and no one else gets pregnant. That's not a coincidence. Ottoman harems didn't run on free love. Every child was a possible heir, and harem wanted no contenders. So she starts managing who gets access to the Sultan, limiting opportunities, subtly demoting rivals. Some women are transferred to other palaces. Others just disappear into private sorrow. One poor girl, gifted in dance and favored briefly, is sent off after a single missed curtsy, probably engineered by harem's closest attendants. You pass by her chamber as she weeps, and you realize sex here isn't pleasure. It's succession. And in that race, harem intends to win. But she doesn't do it alone. Here comes a little-known but vital fringe tidbit. Harem formed a network within the harem, a sort of spy ring composed of loyal concubines, attendants, even eunuchs. They fed her gossip, rivalries, mood swings of powerful figures. She weaponized information like a general uses maps. And then, one evening, she makes her boldest move yet. She confronts the Sultan about his old concubine and son, Mahidevran and Mustafa, not out of jealousy, out of strategy. Because Mustafa isn't just a child, he's a threat. Born before any of harem's sons, older, popular with the military, seen as the natural heir. Harem knows that as long as Mustafa lives, her own children are in danger. So she plants the first seeds of doubt in Suleiman's mind. Slowly, carefully. Have you heard, she might say, voice barely above a whisper, what Mustafa discussed with the Janissaries last week? Is it true? Maybe, maybe not. But the poison works. It always does. From that night forward, the Sultan's gaze shifts. Not dramatically, just a few inches left of center, but enough to unbalance the future. The dominoes are standing now, one behind the other, humming with potential energy. And you can feel her hand behind it all. Harem never lifts a dagger. She doesn't need to. Her weapon is proximity. A touch, a rumor, a withheld smile. This too is power. And even as the empire wages war on its frontiers, expanding into Europe, conquering fortress after fortress, its core begins to vibrate with anxiety. Because no general can compete with the quiet, relentless empire harem is building inside silk walls. An empire of whispers, an empire of shadows. And as the sun sets once more over Istanbul, you realize something else. She hasn't even reached her peak yet. Tonight, you slip through corridors that no longer whisper, they hiss. You hear it in the rustle of skirts moving too fast, the quick breath of a eunuch who's just seen something he won't report, the thick, sweet scent of attar clinging to a letter that shouldn't exist. You feel it. The harem is tense, like a string pulled tight across the empire's throat. And at the center of it all, Harun sits perfect posture, unreadable smile, as if nothing's burning. But make no mistake, the rules have caught fire. Because she's just done what no concubine in Ottoman history has dared. She's stepped out of the shadows. She's no longer content to rule from behind the curtain. Tonight, you watch her break the harem code wide open. This is where things stop being subtle. Harem has always been clever, patient, strategic. But now she's bold. Now she's visible. And visibility, in this world, is dangerous. The Ottoman Empire ran on a very specific illusion, that women, even powerful ones, remained in the background. They influenced, but they didn't appear. They whispered, but they didn't speak. Harem? She's done whispering. She starts appearing with Sultan at public events, breaking centuries of tradition. She starts attending state ceremonies, veiled but unmistakably present. People notice. Court advisors squint and pretend she's not there. Religious leaders mutter. The janissaries, those elite imperial soldiers, grumble into their beards. And yet, Sultan does nothing to stop her. Or rather, he does something worse, he encourages it. You sit behind a column as they walk together through the palace gardens. Not lovers sneaking glances, but equals making plans. It's shocking. Revolutionary, scandalous. One chronicler notes she's now the light of the palace. A poetic way of saying she's in everyone's business. But power this visible needs armor. And harem builds hers out of concrete. Literally, she begins commissioning public works, schools, mosques, bathhouses. Her name, carved into marble. You walk through one now, the Seki Harem Sultan complex clean. Lines, geometric tiles, fountains murmuring like private confidences. It's beautiful, but it's also a message. I am not just a woman, I am an institution. This was her genius. She didn't just want to be a woman beside the Sultan. She wanted to redefine what that meant, and she did. There's a moment, not well known, when harem sits with architects and scholars to design her WQFA charitable endowment. And you watch her ask questions, challenge designs, tweak the layout of the school courtyard so that children can see the minaret from every angle. It's small, but telling. Historians still argue whether she genuinely believed in charity or simply used it as PR. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it's both. Because harem understands something most men in her time don't. Image isn't just decoration, it's doctrine. But not everything she touches turns to gold. Not yet, because the more she rises, the more enemies she makes. The old guard, those who remember the Sultan before he wrote poems and skipped council meetings, begin to plot. Not loudly. Quietly, they start pushing back, whispering to foreign dignitaries, funding rivals in court, always looking for the moment she slips. You smell it in the kitchens, where cooks pause before serving her food. You see it in the gardens, where her favorite handmaid dies suddenly of fever. You suspect it's poison, of course. Everyone does. The harem is a beautiful prison, but it's still a prison. And here's a little-known tidbit. Some eunuchs were trained in chemistry, not to heal, but to kill discreetly. You wonder how many times harem's breakfast has been tested by someone who used to be a pharmacist in Cairo. Still, she doesn't flinch. If anything, she becomes sharper. Begins matching threats with whispers of her own. One afternoon, you catch her in the library, reading a Persian treatise on power annotated. In ink, the margin reads, "He who waits, loses." A week later, one of her political enemies is dismissed. Another retires suddenly to a distant province. Coincidence? Maybe. But then again, when you're as visible as harem, survival demands precision. Meanwhile, the Sultan's mother dies. And with her, the last real check on harem's authority inside the palace. The valid Sultan, traditionally the most powerful woman in the empire, is now her. Technically, she doesn't inherit the title, but practically, she becomes the empire's matriarch. And in that power vacuum, she expands. You hear it in the way people speak to her, no longer with caution, but with awe. You watch as the younger concubines begin to emulate her walk, her speech, her choice of fabrics. Even the eunuchs change their tone. This is no longer just harem, the Sultan's favorite. This is harem, the architect, the political actor, the blueprint for something new. And yes, there's still sex in the equation. But it's changed. It's not conquest anymore. It's ritual, comfort, control. According to the erotic spirit through history, by now, their intimacy may have Cooled physically, but deepened emotionally, a shift that often gave women even greater sway in royal courts. A bond not based on novelty, but on permanence. On the fact that no one knew him better, or ever would. And yet still, there's something fragile underneath it all. A feeling that the higher she climbs, the thinner the air becomes. And you, quietly watching from the corner of her world, wonder what happens if she ever falls. You're standing in a room that doesn't feel like it belongs inside a palace. It's too quiet, too still, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. You're in the eunuch's quarter now, where power is filtered through silence and black robes whisper past stone columns without footsteps. These men are neither slaves nor free, not warriors nor courtiers, but something in between, the gatekeepers. Of secrets, the brokers of whispers, and tonight, the bloodless soldiers in Harem's war. You've arrived at the part of the story where the shadows grow teeth, where alliances don't just happen in the grand hall, but in steam-filled bathhouses, in coded letters folded into hems, and in the slow shifting of loyalty behind every smile. Because now, Harem's world has changed. It's no longer just about surviving the harem or influencing the Sultan. It's about protecting what she's built and eliminating what threatens it. And first on that list is the Grand Vizier. You watch as his name is spoken less often, as his influence wanes, as his daily audiences with the Sultan get shorter. His name? Ibrahim Pasha, childhood friend to Suleiman. Trusted like a brother. Powerful enough to rule in the Sultan's absence. Dangerous enough to make Harem sweat beneath her veil. He's charming, educated, a lover of art and poetry. He even marries Suleiman's sister. But he's also arrogant. Prone to calling himself second only to God and the Sultan, which, never ends well in empires built on ego. Harem senses it. He's too confident, too independent. And worse, he likes Mustafa. Yes, that Mustafa, her stepson. Her son's rival. You don't need a court degree in political science to see where this is going. So she starts digging, feeding Suleiman quiet doubts, highlighting small disloyalties, maybe even staging a few. Historians still argue whether Ibrahim actually plotted against the Sultan, or whether Harem simply engineered enough fear to make. It seemed that way. Either way, the end comes swiftly. One night, after a friendly dinner with Suleiman wine, laughter, shared memories, Ibrahim is escorted to his chambers. He never leaves them, strangled in his sleep by palace guards. His body quietly removed before dawn. No public execution, just ... And Harem? She doesn't gloat. She doesn't need to. You can see it in her posture the next morning. Shoulders straighter, eyes calmer. A threat removed, a space cleared. But this isn't just about one man. It's about what happens when people realize she can pull strings like that. You start noticing how the eunuchs around her become more loyal. How? Messages flow through them like a second bloodstream. And here's a deliciously odd tidbit. The chief black eunuch, one of the most powerful figures in the empire, effectively becomes her right-hand man. This guy controls access to the harem, the Sultan, and many state documents. He was originally enslaved in Ethiopia, castrated, then educated in Islamic law and court politics. Now, he's the quiet engine of Harem's influence. She doesn't just charm him, she employs him. Together, they start reshaping the palace network like it's a private company. Promotions shift. Appointments change. Spies are planted in places even the viziers don't know exist. At this point, you might be wondering, doesn't anyone resist? Oh, they do. Especially the religious elite, who are furious. A woman visible in public, writing letters to foreign kings, commissioning mosques, wielding influence. It's blasphemy in all but name. Pamphlets begin to circulate. Quiet criticisms from scholars. Veiled condemnations in Friday sermons. Some even accuse her of being a foreign agent, a Christian witch, a threat to the soul of Islam itself. But harem, as always, plays chess while others play backgammon. She begins funding religious institutions, supports scholars, sponsors Quran recitation competitions. It's not repentance, it's optics. She uses piety as camouflage, and it works. Public perception, after all, is just another war front. Meanwhile, inside the palace, her sons grow. And with every inch they rise, the stakes double. Because the gain is no longer theoretical, it's real. One son will inherit everything. The others likely strangle it. It's not a metaphor, it's policy. Ottoman succession was never about fairness. It was about stability, which meant one throne, one survivor. And so Hurrem begins another campaign, one she never names aloud. But you can see it in her gaze whenever Mustafa's name is mentioned. He's popular, respected, trained. The people love him. The military adore him. And he's not hers. Which means, in the logic of the empire, he must go. You begin to feel the frost under the warmth now. The sense that no matter how much power she holds, she knows it's temporary unless she secures the future. And the future means getting one of her own sons to the throne and keeping them there. You walk past her tonight as she sits in front of a low mirror, brushing her hair slowly, thinking. Not scheming, calculating, because this empire isn't just about land or armies anymore. It's about narrative. And Hurrem is already writing hers in silken shadows, while the rest of the palace tries to catch up. The Grand Vizier is gone. The eunuchs are hers. The court is shifting. But the deadliest chapter is yet to come. Because as power sharpens, so do the blades. You're crouching behind a velvet curtain, ears straining, heart pounding like a drum buried under cushions. Because tonight you're not in a palace, you're in a chessboard, and every piece on it has blood on its hands or dreams of the throne. Hurrem's world, once scented with roses and softened by poetry, is now the tight, airless chamber of dynastic warfare. And this isn't about influence anymore. It's about survival. For her, for her sons, for the legacy she's bent an empire to build. You see, Ottoman succession isn't a gentle affair. It's fratricide, codified, legal, expected. The moment a new sultan ascends, his brothers are strangled with a silk cord, clean, silent, ceremonial. They call it preventing civil war. You call it what it is, a lottery of death, where the winner gets a throne and the losers get a quiet burial. And Hurrem, she's a mother in that nightmare. She doesn't just raise sons. She raises future victims or future killers. There is no middle option. That's what makes her terrifying. That's what makes her human. You follow her into her private quarters, where the noise of the palace fades and only the weight of motherhood remains. You watch her run fingers through her youngest son's hair, smiling gently. But behind those eyes, fire, calculation, fear. She knows what's coming. She's seen it before. The rumors, the positioning, the shift in how the guards bow. It always starts with the military, with whispers in the Janissary camps. And lately, they've been whispering about Mustafa. Yes, him again, the son of Suleiman. And Mehdi Devran, born before any of Hurrem's children, raised like a crown prince, beloved by the soldiers, respected by the court. He's tall, charismatic, disciplined. The kind of prince that empires dream of, and the kind that mothers like. Hurrem have nightmares about. Because if he takes the throne, her sons are dead. All of them. So now it's not just a rivalry. It's a ticking clock. Hurrem begins to move. Not with open threats, no. With poison-tipped suggestions. She reminds the Sultan of old betrayals. Wonders aloud if Mustafa's popularity is getting ... unmanageable. She slips letters into Suleiman's lap, allegedly intercepted, suggesting his son might be courting foreign alliances, plotting early succession. Are they real? Historians still argue whether Hurrem forged those letters herself, or simply capitalized on existing fears. Either way, the effect is seismic. Suleiman begins pulling back, watching Mustafa more closely, cutting his resources, testing his loyalty. And you lurking nearby, trying not to breathe, can feel it in the palace walls. The dread, the inevitability. But here's where it gets cruel. Harem isn't just fighting for one son, she has several. And Ottoman tradition doesn't allow them all to live. She spent decades surviving, building, seducing, and now she must choose who gets to continue breathing. Her eldest Mehmed dies suddenly fever, some say. Others suspect foul play, though no proof was ever found. Another son, Abdullah, dies young. That leaves three, Selim, Bayezid, and Sanjir. Selim is indulgent, fond of wine and poetry, not exactly war material. Bayezid is bold, clever, popular, but impulsive. Sanjir, the youngest, is brilliant but physically frail, born with a hunched back and plagued by health problems. Each one represents a gamble, and Harem knows she has to place her bet soon. So she leans toward Selim, safe, soft, loyal. The kind who won't forget where he came from. The kind she can mold. But to clear the path, Mustafa has to go. And here's where the empire turns truly dark. You ride with Suleiman on a campaign against Persia. He's aging now, slower, but still terrifying in presence. Mustafa rides to join him, eager, noble, unarmed. Because you never bring weapons into the Sultan's tent. He bows. He enters. He's strangled on the spot. No trial. No warning. Just a death sentence carried out in silence, ordered by his father. Some say Suleiman wept afterward. Some say he ordered it stoically. But what everyone agrees on is that Harem wasn't there. And yet, her fingerprints are all over it. When the news reaches the court, there's shock, fury, rebellion. The Janissaries mutter treason. The people mourn. But for Harem, it's a brutal, necessary move. One son down, hers still alive, almost. Because as Mustafa falls, Sanjir breaks. The youngest, the sweet one, already fragile, dies not long. After rumors say of grief, others of illness. You stand beside Harem as she receives the news. She doesn't cry. She folds the message, presses it to her lips, and whispers something you can't quite hear. A prayer? A curse? Or maybe just a quiet promise that this sacrifice will mean something. That the storm she's unleashed won't be for nothing. You begin to see the cost of power. Not just in blood, but in loneliness. In grief you're not allowed to show. In choices no mother should have to make. And yet she made them, one by one. You leave her tonight standing on a balcony, eyes on the Bosphorus, wind pulling her veil like a ghost. She's won this round. Mustafa is gone. Selim is poised to rise, but you can feel it deep in your gut. Nothing about this victory feels safe or final. You wake to the sound of nothing, and it terrifies you. The palace, usually humming with whispers, footsteps, distant laughter, is silent. Not peaceful, expectant. Like the moment before a storm, when even the birds go quiet. You step into the courtyard and realize why. The empire is blinking. For the first time, really blinking, uncertain, hesitant, unsure whether what it's seeing is the dawn of a new age or the unraveling of the old. And right in the center, standing utterly still, is Harem. Her silk robes flutter in the breeze. But her posture is stone. She knows what you know. That something has shifted. That the center of gravity is off. And now, the entire empire is starting to feel it. The grand machine of Ottoman bureaucracy, war, and tradition has always operated with the same smooth arrogance. Its gears oiled by discipline, blood, and ceremony. But now it stutters. You see it in the council chambers, where the viziers speak more cautiously. You see it in the military barracks, where officers exchange glances before giving orders. You see it in the foreign embassies, where ambassadors rewrite their reports 3 times before sending them back to Vienna or Venice. The problem? No one knows who's really in charge anymore. Sultan, once sharp and ruthless, now moves slower, speaks softer, stares longer into space. His grief over Mustafa is real even if self-inflicted. His trust in his court is eroding. His focus slips from battlefield maps to love poems again. And harem, she fills the vacuum. But it's not as seamless as before. Her power, once hidden behind veils and shadows, is now naked. And visibility, as always, breeds resentment. You trail her through the gardens, where a visiting dignitary bows a little too deeply. Not out of courtesy, but out of caution. Even foreign envoys now know. Speak to her, and you speak to the empire. But that's exactly the problem. The Ottoman court was built on strict hierarchy, on the invisible hand of the Sultan guiding every decision. When that hand starts hesitating, when everyone starts looking at her instead, it's not just scandalous, it's destabilizing. Some of the older viziers start pushing back. Not publicly, of course, but you catch the quiet meetings, the coded glances, the sudden reassignments. One even tries to get a fatwa issued, declaring harem's involvement in state affairs a religious violation. It doesn't pass. But the intention is loud and clear. There's tension now in every room she enters, a flicker in the eyes of guards, a tightness in the smiles of court ladies. One scholar even describes this period as a court lit by candles in a wind tunnel, flickering. Vulnerable, moments from darkness. And here's a tidbit for your late-night trivia bank. This is the first time in Ottoman history that rumors circulate about the empire becoming a matriarchy. Ridiculous? Maybe, but also revealing. Because when power shifts even slightly, people don't measure it in facts, they measure it in fear. Meanwhile, outside the palace, things begin to stall. The empire isn't losing, but it's no longer devouring new territory with the same relentless hunger. Campaigns slow down, decisions are delayed. You hear it in the sighs of generals and the shuffle of impatient janissaries. Where is the fire, they ask. Where is the conquest? And some start to point quietly toward her, as if harem, sitting in her palace chamber, is the reason borders aren't expanding. As if her influence is softening Sultan, domesticating him, dulling his blade. Historians still argue whether harem truly derailed military momentum, or whether it was just the natural plateau of an empire that had already eaten too much. But the suspicion sticks. It always does. And the irony? Harem is still working. She funds more schools, expands her charitable foundations, helps the poor, reforms local endowments. She's not hiding. She's trying to prove she belongs. But the more she steps forward, the more the structure around her trembles. It's not her fault entirely, but it's her face on the poster. And in empire politics, perception is more dangerous than truth. You watch her in her study, writing yet another letter, this time to the Crimean Khan, her distant homeland's leader. She's trying to shore up alliances, manage succession, plan for what happens after Sultan. Because that's what no one dares say aloud yet. He's aging, slower, thinner, mortal. And when he dies, this whole delicate balance will come crashing down. You feel it. She feels it. So she writes. She negotiates. She braces. Because the empire may be blinking now, but soon it will have to open its eyes fully. And when it does, it might not like what it sees. You're back in the shadows again, not because it's safer there, but because it's the only place left to breathe. Tonight, the palace smells like anticipation and sweat. Behind the velvet and gold, something raw is unraveling. You hear it in the sharp click of boots on marble, in the tense, whispered prayers of mothers, and in the way guards grip their scimitars a little too tightly. Succession isn't on the horizon anymore. It's here. And it's ugly. Harem has played her game with surgical precision for decades, but now the board has changed. Mustafa is gone. Sihanger is dead. Mehmed and Abdullah are buried. Only two pieces remain, Selim and Bayezid. And unlike the silent daggers of the harem, this isn't a quiet rivalry. This is open warfare, with silks drawn like battle standards, and each prince backed by his own camp of officials, generals, and increasingly jittery supporters. Selim, Hurrem's favorite, is not impressive. He drinks too much, avoids military campaigns, prefers the comforts of poetry and pleasure over strategy and steel. Bayezid, on the other hand, is fire. Brave, popular with the army, ambitious, charming, and far too aware of it. You trail behind Harem as she watches her sons circle each other, like lions raised in the same cage. She tries to keep them from tearing each other apart. She writes letters, organizes emissaries, whispers into Suleiman's weary ears at night, always guiding, always steering. But now, the machine she built is no longer responding the way it used to. You see it in Suleiman's eyes, duller, more haunted. The man who once took fortresses with the flick of a finger now takes longer to dress in the morning. And in that vacuum of decision, ambition metastasizes. Bayezid begins acting like the heir, building his own court-in-waiting, gathering allies, even defying direct orders from his father. A dangerous game, and one that Harem can't tolerate, not because she hates Bayezid, but because she knows the rules. There's no almost in Ottoman succession. The prince who doesn't win doesn't walk away. He's buried with honors and silence. She leans into Selim now, quietly begins shifting the machinery of state to favor him. Diplomatic favors, financial resources, imperial propaganda. She knows he's not brilliant, but he's obedient, manageable, survivable. And at this stage, survival is the goal. Bayezid knows, and he doesn't back down. In one of the more dramatic episodes, the scribes try to downplay. He refuses to move when summoned to court. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Suleiman, furious, sees it as open defiance. Some say it's Harem who fans the flames. Others say Bayezid was always doomed by his own arrogance. Historians still argue whether she orchestrated the final confrontation or merely watched it happen. But what's certain is this: Bayezid flees with his sons. And in that moment, he becomes not a rival but a rebel. The Ottoman Empire doesn't negotiate with rebels, and Suleiman, even in old age, still knows how to end the threat. He sends Selim's forces to pursue his brother. What follows is a tragedy wrapped in inevitability. Bayezid is hunted, cornered, forced to flee to Persia. You watch Harem in the palace garden, holding a letter that confirms what she already suspects. He's gone too far. And then comes the heartbreak she never wanted. Bayezid is captured, not by the Ottomans, but by the Shah of Persia. Negotiations begin. Bribes, pleas, exchanges. But in the end, the Shah hands Bayezid back. And what does Suleiman do? What he's always done. He signs the order. Bayezid and his 4 sons, Harem's grandsons, are strangled. No trial, no poetry. Just silk cords, quiet rooms, and history written with shadows. You stand in the hallway as the news arrives. Harem, older now, slower, reads the dispatch in silence. Her hand trembles, just once, then stills. She doesn't scream. She doesn't collapse. She just sets the letter down and stares into the distance. And you realize with a chill that she won. But not in the way she imagined. Selim, her weakest son, is now the only one left standing. But at what cost? The court is fractured. The people suspicious. The janissaries restless. And the Sultan, her once lover, her once equal, barely speaks anymore. She walks the palace like a ghost in living skin, half queen, half mother, fully alone. You find yourself wondering whether she ever imagined this outcome, her own legacy carried on the back of the son she barely believed in. While the brighter ones died for the crime of potential, Ottoman succession had always been cruel. But with harem, it became personal, strategic, surgical, and devastating. You hear whispers now in the harem soft, unsure, that she's no longer what she was. That maybe, just maybe, the empire she helped shape is cracking under the weight of what it took to build it. But there's no denying the truth. Harem has cleared the board. And in the silence that follows, you realize it's no longer about power. It's about aftermath. The palace feels brittle now. Not broken, just hollow, like an echo of its former self. You walk beneath domes painted with stars, past golden doors that once guarded lust and laughter, and you realize something. The empire is quieter without its storms. Harem, still draped in silks, still greeted with reverence, has become a figure of stillness, not peace. Just the kind of stillness that follows a battle no one admits happened. Her sons are gone, except Selim, the one who walks in her shadow. More than he walks in his own name. The court has grown careful around her, over-polite, over-formal, as if proximity might provoke whatever invisible fire she once used to incinerate rivals and rewrite the laws of the harem. But even fire cools eventually. And now, you watch her pour her focus into a new obsession. Legacy. Not gossip or revenge. Not whispers or warfare. But stone, endurance, memory. She begins commissioning buildings again, charities, schools, water fountains, bathhouses, mosques. It's not random. It's geometry with a pulse. Each corner of her empire will carry her name long after her voice goes silent. You wander through one of them now, the Haseki complex in Istanbul. It smells of linden and soap. A place for women, the poor, the forgotten. And you feel something you didn't expect: compassion. Because for all the politics, all the bloodshed, all the manipulation and ambition, this woman still builds sanctuaries, still funds bread for the hungry. Still wants, in some buried corner of her heart, to be remembered not just as the architect of power, but as the architect of mercy. She writes more letters now too. And one set, in particular, survives. Her love letters to Sultan sent when he was far off campaigning, or when she knew his mind was slipping into darkness. You read one beside her candlelit desk. The ink is faded, but the words burn. My Sultan, my soul, my existence depends on your breath. If I am alive, it is by your command. Without you, my world is nothing. It's not just romantic. It's political poetry. A calculated vulnerability. A performance? Maybe, but also sincere. Because love, even when wrapped in power, still bleeds. And here's something not many people know. Those letters weren't just sentimental. They carried coded messages, updates about court tensions, status of their children, political warnings cloaked in metaphors. Love in Harem's world was never separate from strategy. And Suleiman? He wrote back. Until the end, his replies were fewer, shorter, slower, but still hers. And in that exchange, you sense something deep. Not weakness, not obsession, but a kind of exhausted devotion, like two survivors of the same fire, clinging to the only thing that still makes sense. You see him less often now, the Sultan. He spends more time alone, wandering gardens, visiting tombs. He no longer speaks in absolutes. He no longer writes epic laws. He begins to sketch quiet scenes, trees, a riverbank, the shape of her profile. And every time, harem is there, not in person, always. But in essence, he builds no palace without her blessing. Makes no major decision without glancing her way. Foreign diplomats, desperate to understand this, begin describing her influence in letters as unprecedented, unnatural, unnerving. Historians still argue whether this was weakness or evolution, whether Suleiman was bewitched or enlightened. Whether Harem was a genius of love, or simply the first woman clever enough to turn affection into authority. But you're standing in their space now, and none of those labels seem quite right. Because it wasn't simple, it wasn't clean. And most of all, it wasn't a love story the way fairy tales sell it. It was survival, partnership, two people who saw something in each other that transcended their roles. But while their bond tightens, the empire outside begins to rumble. Wars no longer feel glorious. Troops are tired. Tax coffers strain. Corruption nibbles at the edges. And through it all, people begin to murmur the unthinkable. Is the Ottoman Empire starting to decay? Not collapse. Just ... Soften, lose focus, lose speed. And you hear those same voices link it, whether fairly or not, to her. To the woman who made the Sultan human, who pulled him inward, toward emotion, away from expansion. One Venetian ambassador writes, "She has captured his heart, and with it, his empire." Is that true? Maybe, maybe not. But the fear in that sentence is real. Because for centuries, empires feared what they couldn't control, and what they couldn't explain. And Harem, she was both. You stand beside her one late evening as she watches the call to prayer echo across the city. Her eyes scan the skyline. Mosques, many of them hers, catch the last blush of sun. The empire she helped shape stretches in every direction. Her children lie in tombs, her enemies in rumors, her victories in stone. She doesn't speak, she just listens. And in that silence you realize she's almost done. The intrigue, the seduction, the survival, all of it soon to end. And she knows, that's the thing. Harem has always known when her time is closing in. She's not afraid of it. Just determined that when it comes, she won't be erased. Not by time, not by scholars, not by the empire that once tried to hide her behind a curtain. Because when she finally slips from this world, she won't leave quietly. She'll leave in marble, in ink, in echoes. The light in Topkapi has changed. It's gentler now, more golden than gilded, like the palace itself is preparing for a farewell. You walk slowly through corridors you've come to know like arteries, but tonight they pulse with something different. Not tension, not fear, just ... ending. And in the heart of it you find her, Harem Sultan, sitting alone in a garden she commissioned, beneath a cypress tree she once requested be planted for shade. There's no crown on her head, no guards flanking her sides, no letters to sign or enemies to destroy. Just a woman, old now, watching petals fall into a fountain she designed. It's a moment no historian ever quite captured. Because Harem didn't go out with fire, she went out with stillness. The woman who changed everything, who bent the harem, the Sultan, and the empire to her will, died not on a battlefield or in a scandal, but in her bed, peacefully, quietly. But don't let that fool you. Her death was seismic. You feel it before the court announces it. A subtle dread crawling through the palace. Eunuchs exchange glances. Concubines go silent. Even Sultan, that old lion, closes his eyes and doesn't speak for a day. He outlives her, but only just. He'll go on ruling for another 8 years, but everyone knows the heart of the court is gone. The only person who could speak to him without bowing is gone. The only one who ever matched him in wit and resolve is gone. And you? You stand among the women of the harem as they prepare her body. No grand ceremony, no excessive pageantry. Just ritual washing, soft recitations, jasmine water, and silk. They wrap her in white. Her face is uncovered for a moment. You look, she's older, of course, but not diminished. There's something eternal in her expression, as if she knew exactly how this would unfold. As if death was just the final room she had yet to enter and master. When she's buried, it's beside Suleiman's future tomb, a place he had built long before, but now redesigned to make space for her, another break in Ottoman tradition. Sultans didn't bury their wives beside them. Harem rewrote that too. They call it the Suleimani Mosque complex. You've probably seen it in postcards. What you might not know is that Harem's tomb is just a few steps away. Equal distance to God, in stone if not in name. And that's the legacy, not just love. Not just sex or politics or whispered schemes. But physical, undeniable proof that a woman once ruled an empire from behind a veil and refused to vanish. When it was time to leave. Even now, centuries later, she haunts the narrative. Scholars try to place her. Was she a feminist icon, a manipulator, a poisoner, a strategist? Historians still argue over whether her love for Suleiman was genuine or a masterclass in control. Whether she saved the empire by stabilizing succession or doomed it by elevating weak heirs. The truth is, she was all of it, and more. She was a survivor, a mother, a builder, a seductress, a reader of people and of empires. And she left behind something far more powerful than a son on a throne. She left behind a model. Because after her, the age of the imperial harem truly begins. 100 years of women sultanas, mothers, daughters, quietly ruling through the walls. Architects of policy, patrons of art, brokers of peace, and sometimes war. They call it the Sultanate of Women. And without harem, it would never have happened. You walk the halls now and still feel her. In the curve of the staircases. In the silence after the call to prayer. In the tension behind every curtain. She's in the DNA of the palace. Not a ghost. A blueprint. The concubine who rose to queen without ever taking the title. Who killed without lifting a blade. Who loved without surrendering herself. And now, as you pass her tomb, you wonder what she'd think of all this. The documentaries. The novels. The conspiracy theories. The drama. Maybe she'd smile. Maybe she'd say nothing. Or maybe, if she could whisper one final truth, it would be this. Power doesn't always look like a sword. Sometimes it looks like a letter, a smile, a child, sleeping safely behind a locked door. And that empire? The one built by men, glorified by conquest, immortalized in marble. It blinked, and when it did, she stepped through. Changed it, softened it, controlled it, and then left it, like she left everything else on her terms. And now, with the garden growing quiet and the scent of rosewater fading into night, you feel the story settling around you like a soft woven shawl. Harem is gone, but the empire still breathes with her echo. Every stone she touched, every life she altered, every secret she kept curled behind a half-smile in the flickering candlelight. You've wandered through desire, danger, and dynasty. And now at last, it's time to rest. Let the lessons hum low in the background. Let the silks and shadows of the palace dissolve into your dreams. You made it through the labyrinth. You survived the harem. You walked alongside a woman who was never supposed to matter and watched her matter more than anyone. So close your eyes. Let the empire sleep. The intrigue can wait until morning. End of script. Sweet dreams.